What's good, combat sports fans? Welcome back to another episode of Combat and Kick It. It's your host, Bando. We back at it with another episode because we got to come through with the review of UFC 309. Jon Jones gets it done again and still UFC heavyweight champion of the world. He takes out Stipe Miocic in great fashion, and we definitely got to discuss it. We got to talk about it. We got to see if our predictions were on point, all types of things. And there's a few other things we got to discuss too, so let's waste no more time. Let's get right into it. Let's go. So you know how these reviews go. I like to start from what I did break down in the first place and get to reviewing it, right? There was a few other fights that I'm going to discuss on this card. There was a couple good prelim fights that need to be talked about. But the main card really lived up to what I expected it to be. It wasn't a stacked card by any means. It wasn't a crazy amazing card. It was decent. Surprisingly, one of the highest gates in UFC history. Actually, you know, I mean, that's not surprisingly because it is MSG and it is Jon Jones and Stipe, but, you know, still wasn't that great of a card, wasn't that stacked of a card, and, you know, the hype was pretty low until week of type of thing, so it didn't really pick up until week of when it came to the hype, so, good for them, though, good at the fact that they did hit some type of gate record in MSG. That's massive. Anytime you do some sort of record in MSG, it's massive because it's one of the most classic arenas in history, in sports history, combat history, any which way, right? You go from sports history to music history to shows, all different things. MSG is massive when it comes to that. So being able to have some sort of gate record when going to MSG, that's huge for them. So good win on the I was about to say WWE, on the UFC's part. Really good win on the UFC's part. But let's get into these fights. So two performances I have to point out off of the prelims. First one was Marcin Tybura, and the second one is Jim Miller. Two fighters who have been in the UFC a little while. Obviously, we know Jim Miller much longer has been in the UFC. He's been running the game for a while without being at the top of it. He's just been running. You know, but Marcin Tybura is somebody that I'm pretty much against every time he comes in. Not with any dislike to Tybura. When it comes to big fights and these young guys on a come up, Tybura is kind of a gatekeeper. And I expect him to take losses against these guys that he's there to gatekeep against. And on Saturday night, just wasn't it. It's one of those things where you get fighters like a Marcin Tybura who will continuously get wins, but he will not get wins at the championship level, right? He will not get top 5 wins. He will not get top 3 wins. He's getting top 10 wins, keeping himself relevant within the top 10 of heavyweight, but at the same time, he's not getting anything that's so incredibly major that's just stamping himself with growing his name and being a top guy in the division besides just being a top 10er. Because being a top 10er in the heavyweight division is not extremely impressive, right? In terms of there's not that many people. The division is not that stacked, right? And I'm not saying talent, well, I'm just saying there's really not that many. Think about how many heavyweights besides the ones in the top 10 that you talk about. There's not many other heavyweights that I can think of that come to mind when you're talking about the top 10 heavyweight, top 12, top 15, top 20. After 10, I don't feel like a lot of people know that many heavyweights. And this past weekend for Tybura, his fight was basically that. You had Denise coming in. He was a guy who a lot of people expected to come in and get the win, right? Whether it was stand-up, whether it was ground, it didn't matter. Everybody expected him to get the win because Tybura is used to losing those fights that he gatekeeps. So, surprise for him to get a win, but great KO win. Great KO win. Good finish for him. So, he definitely deserved that. Then you go to Jim Miller. Jim Miller, another guy who was down underdog on the card. In my opinion, I it's hard to rock against a guy like Jim Miller because Jim Miller isn't always a gatekeeper, right? Jim Miller is just a crafty veteran who has been in the game for a long while, fought over 50-something fights, continues to put on fights, put on good shows, put on good performances, and continues to beat young guys on their way up. So he isn't a gatekeeper. I look at him as just a different style of a gatekeeper, not your typical gatekeeper. He's gonna go down in history as a fight legend. Yeah, his career in itself might not be legendary in terms of the wins, in terms of it, but he has broke records. Jim Miller's broke records, right? Win records and different records in the division. Like, is he gonna end up deserving Hall of Fame one day? It's very possible, but it's hard to say when you put a guy in the Hall of Fame that hasn't been at the top of the division, right? But Jim Miller has been in the game, I want to say, all the way since the WEC days, if not slightly after, right? So that's a long while of fighting. And if I'm wrong, I could be wrong. Could be even before. Could be even before that, right? Could be before that whole switch up and that buyout came over. But either way, Jim Miller, fantastic performance as an underdog against a guy people thought he was going to go in and lose to, because they talked about Damon Jackson's performance looking so great last performance, and it did. He did have a great last performance, but you cannot count on a guy like Jim Miller, an absolute crafty veteran who, if the fight goes to the ground, is always dangerous. You guys got to remember, when it comes to age in a ground game, if you are a veteran and you are good when it comes to jiu-jitsu, it doesn't matter if you're 25 or 45. The game on the ground is still the game, right? Standing up is a little bit different, right? You're more fluent, you move different, you're a little bit quicker, cardio might be better, but when it's on the ground, it's a whole nother level. These guys can continue snapping arms, continue getting you in submissions, chokeholds. I mean, he locked that guillotine in like it was nothing. And that's that veteran status of Jim Miller, being able to know that all he has to do is just slip that in at the right time, and he did, and he got the win. So shout out to Jim Miller. So, main card, we're going to get right into it. I have wasted way too much time on these two prelim fights. So, opening the main card, you had Mauricio Rufy going up against James Lontop. Keep forgetting this dude's name. James Lontop. Not really hip to him. I knew that he has fought other guys that were supposed to be guys on the come up, right? Kind of making their name. And I thought this was a performance this was a fight where Mauricio Rufy was going to come in and put that, star-studded performance on, start to rise himself up. A lot of people weren't sold on this past weekend's performance. I still think he did good. His striking is slick. He took some shots. He had a guy come back forth with him a little bit, so it wasn't just an automatic him completely taking the fight. He looked good, though. He looked good. He looked like he has a lot of potential in the future, right? He is in a difficult division, but it's got a lot of potential for the future. He's a very fluent, fun striker. Like I said, he's got unorthodox styles and stuff like that. He did his thing, landing a couple good shots, landing some no-look punches, right? And people are like, oh, no, it's just him being sloppy. No, it's him landing no-look punches. Like, he is genuinely throwing that punch, that uppercut, while looking that way, but he knows he's going uppercut to the chin. Like, he is very skilled, very talented. And with these fighting nerds, man, you got Carlos Prates with the performance last weekend. You got Mauricio Rufy with the performance this weekend. I think the next person to fight is going to be Jean Silva. And then, everybody's waiting to see what's going to happen with Kyle Barallo. But good performance. Will continue the streak running from Mauricio Rufy. Continues to stay undefeated. And we'll see what happens if that wave of the fighting nerds takes over in 2025, because they have been grasping the end of 2024. Let's see if that could take over for 2025. But good win by Mauricio Rufy. We got 1-for-1 on the predictions. Moving on to Viviane Araújo versus Karine Silva. I actually didn't really get to see this fight, but when I look back at the highlights, it did just look like Viviane Araújo took most control of the fight. She was controlling the fight on the ground. Looks like she was taking her down a little bit, holding her down, not doing a ton, landing some ground and pound, winning some stand-up exchanges. Just kind of your typical unanimous decision win. Wasn't unbelievably amazing performance. It didn't seem like it was anything crazy special, but it was what she needed to do, get the job done, and Vivian Araujo got it done. So that moved my predictions to 1 and 2, because I had Karine Silva going in, and I thought Karine Silva being the not young up and comer, but like being the younger talent, being somebody who hasn't gotten to be in the position of being in a fight at like like on a card in MSG. She hasn't really been there yet, and I thought this was going to be like a coming out party for her. She's going to make a statement, make some noise. And Vivian Araujo, I mean, she's a veteran, but she's known to drop some big fights. And this wasn't a big fight, but she's known to drop fights. And I thought might have been happening again this Saturday and didn't. Vivian Araujo got the win. So shout out to her. Congrats to her for that one. Moving on to the next fight, you got Bo Nickal and Paul Craig. Bo Nickal and Paul Craig was not the performance that I expected on either end. In my opinion, Paul Craig got the worst Bo Nickal he can possibly get, and that was the night that Paul Craig should have won. That was the night. Saturday night was the night that somebody should have been handing Bo Nickal that one. That 0 should be gone right now. With a performance like that, and I'm not saying he did bad, I'm just saying with the way that people are looking at Bo Nickal as being a potential threat in the future, right? Being a top guy in the division in terms of wrestling, in terms of strike, every aspect, like people see him in the top of the division, right? Performances like that are not going to do it. But we also have seen a lot of guys in his position put on a performance like that, and that fight being the one that, all right, you guys saw the last of the boring, the last of the not so good. These next few fights are going to be really, really, solid, really enjoyable, really fun, explosive, all types of things. So you never know. Bo Nickal might come out in these next few fights looking like an absolute dog, absolute savage. And he is an absolute dog. He is an absolute savage. Just performance-wise, I wasn't impressed. And I was, I guess, to say disappointed in Paul Craig, because knowing Paul Craig's skill set, knowing what he was looking for, knowing what he was chasing, I just feel like you got the worst version of Bo Nickal. You had every opportunity you could get in that fight, and you didn't take anything. You didn't get it. You didn't look like you showed up to fight the way that you were talking you were going to. So, Bo Nickal got the win. Didn't really screw with my prediction, because I predicted that Bo Nickal would get the decision win, but I wasn't counting Paul Craig out. Especially in a situation like this. Like, look at the performance Bo Nickal had. If there was an opportunity for somebody to end up getting a dub, it would have been Paul Craig on Saturday night, and Paul Craig could not live up to it. So, nothing against Paul Craig. Obviously, top guy. He's a top guy in the division, one of the best submission artists in the game, but you gotta show up in these moments. MSG, undefeated contender, you don't want him to make his name off you, and luckily he didn't technically make a name off of you, right? Putting on the performance he put on is the best thing that could have happened in your loss. You know what I'm saying? Like, Paul Craig, you lost, but you lost in the best way possible, right? But you also had the worst Bo Nickal to be able to take over and get a W. So, go win by Bo Nickal. What's next for Bo Nickal? There's going to be a lot of discussion. That's going to be my next video. I'm breaking down who should fight who next, because there is going to be a lot of discussions on what's next for Bo Nickal. I remember so many people were getting him that hype of, ooh, he's going to be a potential threat for Hamzat one day. After Hamzat just broke Rob Whittaker's bottom row of teeth, I am not sold on that one at all. I think Hamzat runs right through that cat. Now, I do think Bo Nickal is a phenomenal wrestler, a next level wrestler, but performances like Saturday night, not the type of performance you want to bring up against a guy like Hamzat. But go win. He's got a lot more to do. We'll see what happens in the future. I'm sure we'll see a lot of Bo Nickal in 2025, as long as he can stay healthy and everything like that. I'm sure we'll see him at least 3 times in 2025. The co-main event, my boy Charlie Olives getting it done against Michael Chandler. The Iron Mikes did not have a good weekend this past weekend. We'll talk about that other Iron Mike fight later, but they did not have a good weekend this past weekend. Charles Oliveira gets it done against Michael Chandler. Great fight. We already knew it was going to be an explosive fight. When 2 guys like Charles and Michael Chandler get into the octagon, it's going to bring for 2 of the most explosive rounds you're going to see. And then who knows after that? Very unpredictable fight after that. But those 2 rounds always going to be explosive with the two of them, right? Charles performed great in my opinion. I'm not going to say phenomenally. I'm not going to say perfect, but I'm going to say great. He looked great. He looked sharp. He looked clean. Performances like that are what made me a fan of Charles Oliveira. Now, obviously, we're used to seeing Charles get the finish, right? He's got the most finishes in UFC history. Besides that, a lot of guys don't end up giving up their back to Charles Oliveira and still being able to survive to say that they saw a decision, right? So, but great performance by Charles regardless. His stand-up was on point. He was landing good shots, landing good rights. He was throwing that 1-2 down the middle. He was throwing the uppercuts. He was throwing flying knees, jump knees in tight, right? I thought this was going to be a fight that Chandler took over, right? I thought Chandler was going to come out, have such an explosive first round that it was going to determine how the fight was going to go. And I was wrong. Charles controlled 90% of that fight, right? Michael Chandler did pretty well, but there was moments in that fight that Michael Chandler could not take over. Every time he attempted to, Charles would end up in a position where he could at least just control from the position, right? He's not a backpacker. He's trying to get the submission. Michael Chandler is just that strong to be able to defend any type of submission that people throw at him. But Charles did his thing, and I am happy as a Charles fan. I can't be mad at it at all, right? Do I want to see him fight for the belt next? Of course. Of course I want to see him fight Islam, right? And who knows, maybe he fights Arman. Either way, it's either fight that he ends up coming back to getting, either championship fight he ends up getting is going to be a rematch. So it'll be kind of dope. There was a couple things in this fight that I noticed that he's going to need to change, and it might be too late in terms of changing in his career because he's not young anymore, but he's got no head movement. A lot of my friends, we talk about this a lot. He has no head movement. To me, his defense is there. He blocks decently, but just has no head movement. His head is completely on the center line all the time. But his striking is so good. His hands are so good that it kind of makes up for it because he gives you those flashy type of not flashy in terms of like look, in terms of like, oh no, it literally sparks the guy as soon as he hits him. It's a flashing punch. He's so quick. He hits at the tail end of his punches. It's just what he does to guys, man. It doesn't matter that unless you're going to knock him out, right, you're going to catch him with something that's going to knock him out, which 3 guys have gotten extremely close, and that was Michael Chandler, Dustin Poirier, and Justin Gaethje, and they couldn't get it done. But if you're going to knock him out, right, you got to catch him at one of those times when he's coming in, and a lot of times he's landing his shots you're not trying to counter, right? Michael Chandler is one of the guys who will tuck down and just chuck something over top, right? And a lot of times it could work for him because he's so quick and he's so explosive. But it did not work against Charles. He landed a couple shots on Charles in those moments, but couldn't step Charles back. Until the last round, you didn't see much real success from Michael Chandler. And Michael Chandler had a lot of success at the end of that round, or not end of the round, end of the fight, because of the back of the head. Let me start over. He started winning the 5th round, right? Regardless, he was winning that round. But the whole aspect of that round and the whole aspect of that fight could have been changed from the unnecessary back of the head shots that my man's Keith Peterson just was ignoring. I mean, blatant back to just blatant, clear back of the head shots. Now, we always talk about people that are cheaters. Is Michael Chandler now somebody we have to put on the list? Because if you look at all of his fights, you are consistently getting people complaining about certain things. Glove grabbing, fence holding, right? You saw him dig his hands in Dustin's face, let that loogie just drop into Dustin's face. He does seem like he's grabbing shorts here and there. Like, not to say Michael Chandler's a cheater. Michael Chandler is a class act when it comes to the fight game. So I'm not trying to call him a cheater, but he does have a lot of instances where a lot of his past fights, these guys have said, a little dirty. So a lot of people are talking about they want to see Charles versus Max next, get that rematch going, which would be a very fun fight for the fans. I think it would be an exciting fight for the fans, especially a performance that Charles put on this past weekend, you're like, okay, him in a 5-round fight with Max Holloway, that could be really exciting. That could be really, really exciting, right? But it would just be different. It would be a tough way to bring back Max Holloway, but it is an exciting fight. If you're not going to be sitting back, having Charles just sit back and wait until the title shot is his, that is an exciting fight. Maybe you can do Volk and Charles at 155, even though I think Volk and Diego Lopez is official. I think it's supposed to be official, but if it's not official, Volk ever moves to 155, that's an interesting fight. But the real question is, what's next for Michael Chandler? Because Michael Chandler kind of screwed himself here. So you sit out for 2 years, waiting. Fight gets close, boom. Gets close, boom. Gets close, boom. Smacked out every single time. Didn't even get an opportunity to make it to a freaking press conference with Conor McGregor. This fight was never meant to happen. It was discussed to happen, but it truly was never meant to happen. It wasn't going to happen. But you feel bad for Michael Chandler because you sit out all this time now, right, to come back to get a rematch against the guy that beat you for the title, right? Took your title aspirations, right? Took your opportunity, took your chances. You think you're going to come back for that and get a huge dub, right? And you don't end up getting the dub. Who do you fight next? What do people want to see from Michael Chandler? Some people even said Michael Chandler and Max Holloway for the BMF, but it's hard. You cannot make call outs after losing. You know what I'm saying? And Max Holloway's coming off a loss too, so who knows what the UFC wants to do with him, right? A lot of people think it's either going to be him and Charles or him and Michael Chandler. You don't know what the UFC is trying to do with him. You don't know what type of matchup they're trying to make at 155 for him, if they are right now, or if he's just chilling. So you gotta just give it a minute and see what's gonna happen. I can see Michael Chandler making sense only being able to fight Conor McGregor, right? Who else is exciting in the division? Maybe you give him a fight like Fiziev, right? Give Rafael Fiziev when he comes back, Michael Chandler in an explosive type of fun fight, but how many times is he going to put on those fights to end up losing, right? You can only stay in the division and stay relevant. Yes, you could put on exciting fights, but if every exciting fight is a loss, you're Nate Diaz. But I think for Michael Chandler, the title aspirations are gone. The title shot, title opportunity is gone unless there was some sort of short notice, quick pull out type of thing, and he was the one who got the call. You already know he would accept that offer if it came through. But tough run for Michael Chandler right now, having all that time sitting out, coming back, taking a loss, what to do. It's going to be discussed on the next episode, that's for sure, because I'm doing the idea of who should fight, what every fight should be made after UFC 309. So we'll get into a deeper discussion on what is next for Michael Chandler, but I feel bad for him on that one. But fantastic, top tier performance from former champion Charles Oliveira. That was a championship level performance, and that showed why he has been there and why he may end up getting back to the title shot. I ain't gonna say to the belt. I'm not so sure on it anymore. You know, Islam Makhachev continues to get better every single time, and it's tough for me to even say that he might not have a chance. But if you never know. You never know. If he gets to the title shot again, if he gets this opportunity again, and it's not in freaking Abu Dhabi, I got high hopes. But good win by Charles Oliveira. And on to the main event. All right. The prediction was right and wrong. Okay, because if you look at the breakdown, you look at the podcast, you look at the Instagram, the TikTok, any reels that I posted, right? I mentioned that this fight is either going to be rather easy for Jon Jones, or, because it's been a crazy, crazy year, Stipe Miocic was going to get a knockout. Well, it's not that crazy of a year, because Jon Jones came in and did what Jon Jones does, and he got the victory against Stipe Miocic. And the main thing that I took from this fight is it's one of the first wins Jon Jones has ever gotten in his career without poking an eye. Good job, Johnny Bones. You didn't poke an eye in this one. Congratulations. Even went back to the old gloves. Complained like a little. You can't call Jon Jones any names. You know what I'm saying? I think if we were in a room, I'm fucked. But either way, no, I think it was kind of like real stupid to ask for the old gloves. I thought it was like typical egotistical John asking for the old gloves in the UFC. Oh, yes, Johnny. Yes, Johnny. Five years ago, everybody in this fucking staffing company was complaining and bitching about you. All of a sudden, in the last 2 years, we are on your nutsack. All of a sudden, we are swinging from your balls. We just hated you, but now we're swinging from your balls. That's the UFC company as a whole. All of a sudden loves this man. But either way, we're not talking about that. We're talking about the fight. He had a fantastic performance. I can't take nothing away from it. He had a fantastic performance. And here's the thing, right? You take a good performing John Jones and take nothing away from the performance. I think his performance would have been his performance regardless, right? That was the worst Stipe, and everybody can sit back and admittedly say that was the worst Stipe they have ever seen in the octagon. That was not the Stipe Miocic that has 5 UFC heavyweight title defenses. That is not the Stipe Miocic that beat Daniel Cormier twice. That is not the Stipe Miocic that on his back foot knocked out Verdum in his home country. That was not him. That was not him. That was the 42-year-old Stipe who's been out for 4 years, coming off of a knockout from one of the heaviest hitters in the game's history. That's what that was. So yes, John Jones performed extremely well against the worst version of Stipe Miocic he possibly could. Now, don't take too much from that. If that was the best version of Stipe, I think it's a more difficult fight. It's a tougher fight. It's a closer fight. But I think the way we saw it go, John ends up getting his hand raised 8 out of 10, 7 out of 10, 7 out of 10 times. I'll probably say 70% of the time John Jones gets his hand raised in that, because just quicker, right? Better kicks. Had Stipe biting on stuff, and that could just be the rust, right? Stipe being in there with the ring rust. 4 years, man. 4 years, and you're coming to your last fight was a knockout. It's not a good way to come back against somebody like John Jones. But I thought the type of person that Stipe is, the style that Stipe brings, the attitude that Stipe brings, I thought he was going to push forward, meet right in the middle, not take a step back, throw heavy shots, but instead he looked flat-footed, throwing off punches, looking like he was truly stuck in the mud, couldn't get going. That was the problem. He looked like he could not get going. And if he did land something to start get going, he wasn't moving his feet. His feet were just planted there. And, you know, it sucks seeing, because that's not the type of guy you want to see fight in these types of fights, man. This was a major fight, massive fight. You wanted to see Stipe go in there and at least perform to the best of his abilities, and he probably did. It's just he's been out for so long, and you come back against a guy who has been, you know, a little bit more active. I'm not going to say a lot more active, but a little bit more active. It's tough. It's tough. And it's obviously somebody we know to be more fluent in terms of striking, more loose, have more in the arsenal. Like, we all knew that John Jones was going to be better in that aspect, right? But I just did not expect Stipe to be what we saw. That was tough. That was tough. Having back-to-back on Friday, watching old man Mike Tyson in that, whatever you want to call it, against Jake Paul, whatever that was, that so-called boxing match. I don't know what that was, but you know, you go from seeing a legend like that lose to seeing another future Hall of Famer, right? Or a future Hall of Famer, not another, but a future Hall of Famer in Stipe Miocic. It's just rough, man. It's rough. First and foremost, for the Mike fight, shouldn't even have been sanctioned. I don't know why that was even sanctioned. We need to stop sanctioning fights with people that have a 30-year age gap. It's just stop. We saw even Bernard Hopkins, when he was active fighting at maybe 48 years old, and got knocked out of the ring by Joe Smith. So and who's Joe Smith? Exactly. He got smoked by Artur Beterbiev the last time I saw him fight. So it's one of those things, right, where the age gap fights, you got to stop with them. You got to stop with them. No matter if it's a gimmick fight, no matter what the case may be, just cut it out. It's done. No more age gap fights. If a guy is over 50 and he's going in there to fight, it cannot be sanctioned against a man who is in his 20s. End of story. especially if it's a fucking legend, right? For the Stipe one, it's much different, right? If Stipe stayed active in those 4 years, his age wouldn't look that bad, right? Because you look at how Glover Teixeira was when he stayed active at his age. He competed with the best, going 5 rounds with top guys, right? Beating top guys, submitting top guys, dropping top guys. Like, activity matters. And that was Stipe's biggest problem. I noticed one thing he was saying in the build-up, that if he didn't get this fight or something like that, he would have took other fights, which is the biggest lie I've ever heard. Because if you would have took other fights, you would have just took other fights within the 4 years, and we wouldn't have been discussing it. Either you would have been still on top of the division, or somebody would have knocked you down a few pegs. But either way, you get this fight against Jon Jones, and I'm not even thinking that Jon Jones is going to come in looking all that great. And I'm impressed by the performance, right? But unimpressed at the same time, right? If that was him versus Tom Aspinall, think about how much more impressive that performance looks. And everybody's going to say, oh, but Stipe is one of the best heavyweights of all time. No argument. But he's 42, and he's been out for 4 years. An active young up-and-comer like Tom Aspinall, who was the interim champion. It's the first time I've ever seen an interim champion not get the next title shot. You know, people really want to see that fight, and people are Jon Jones casuals who only pop out when Jon Jones fights. I notice this a lot. Like Jon Jones casuals, oh, Jon Jones to go only come. They're like I call them the Floyd Mayweather fans, because they do the same thing. They just pop out when the big name guys come out, and then they're a big fan of them, right? You know, you see it very, very often, and it happens a lot in MMA. The real fans know what's up when it comes to backing certain fighters, right? You know who backs who, but all these people come out and they see Jon Jones win, and it becomes Jon Jones is the GOAT, right? You guys have not been sitting here stressing like MMA fighters when it comes to Jon Jones, right? All throughout these years of trying to get these fights and arguments and defending Jon Jones. I ain't got nothing left. So it's one of those things where all these people pop out with Jon Jones. He becomes the GOAT, and then they start talking like, oh, Tom Aspinall is a nobody who fought nobodies. Use a nobody who knows nobody. Talking about Tom Aspinall hasn't fought nobody. Like I was just saying earlier in this video, the top 10 of the heavyweight division, right, is not that long. It's not a stretch of a bunch of big different names, right? Why? Because guys get cleared out quickly in heavyweight divisions, right? Tom Aspinall has beaten Sergey Pavlovich, Curtis Blades, Alexander Volkov, Marcin Tybura. Those are 4 top 10 heavyweights right there. Those are 4, right? You take all of his fights from Marcin Tybura to this last Curtis Blades fight, and he got those done quicker than Jon Jones got Stipe Miocic out of there. So for all the people that step back and say that Tom Aspinall is a nobody, I hate to use this word, but y'all some casuals. Jon Jones did fantastic. I can't take nothing away from him. So congratulations to Jon Jones. He's back, and still we'll see if he continues to stay active or if this is going to be a one and done thing. You never know with Jon Jones. We're shooting for it now, and then 2 months later we never hear from him again. But good job for Jon Jones. Good win. He's back up top, and that's that. Appreciate you guys for watching this episode. You know what to do. Like, comment, subscribe. Hit the bell notification button so you know when the next episode is out. I'll catch you there. Your boy Bando's out. Peace.